Really pleased to be here with you, and I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation. Here it is. There we go. Anyway, very pleased to be here. This is my topic I've been working about for about 4 decades. So very pleased to talk about it to anybody, answer any questions at the end. And when the Institute invited me, they asked me to do an introduction, which would be about 35 minutes or so, to leave plenty of time for other comments and definitely questions and answers. I'm particularly impressed with the full title of the Institute, for Civil Political Communications, which is something our country desperately needs now. And so I'm very, very appreciative that the Institute focuses on this particular issue. So we're going to talk about congressional legislative redistricting. Let me give a little history of the Panhandle and our districts of recent history. But of course, redistricting is the drawing of legally defined and delimited geographic areas in which all qualified voters have the right to select a representative. So it's geography, which happens to be my discipline. So if we have ward boundaries in the city or county commissioner boundaries in a state like Florida, they are lifted by districts, and it's a very, very important boundary, important area. And of course, the more familiar state house and state senate districts in all states and U.S. House of Representative districts. So our representation thing is a geographic representation in a sense. For most of American history, not all of American history, the House of Representatives has been from single-member districts. And for most of American history, it's one election, one time, one vote, majority or plurality winner. So if there happens to be a third-party candidate, which there happen to be many times in American history, the winning candidate may not have a majority. But that's the basic system that's been held, at least in the U.S. House of Representatives. But again, that's the system now, has not quite been that way for all of American history. So how are these districts drawn? It's basically a regular law passed by state legislatures. So historically, and our current press release from the members of leaders of the legislature is going to be a joint committee, but the joint committee will propose something in the state of West Virginia. It will pass the state legislature, the House of Delegates. It will go to the Senate. It will be passed the Senate and signed by the governor, just like every other law. And so that's the way districting laws have been done almost throughout American history. But in recent years, there's been a new system and a new desire, another look at democracy, and it could be called the future. That is having what is called a nonpartisan independent citizens electoral commission draw the maps. And we're going to talk about what that is and what states have done so far, and a little bit later in the presentation. And so if we have the ability in the states to draw congressional and state legislative districts, there is what I call possibilities of mischief. And this is called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the drawing of legislative voting district boundaries in such a way to favor a certain party or group. And I've written a journal article about the first gerrymander and how gerrymanders came about. But the term was first used in the newspaper Boston Gazette on Thursday, March 26, 1812. It's very rare in the English language where you can say this word appeared at this date and this place and time. Usually the English words go way back and we think that it occurred at this particular time. And this happens to be the actual newspaper of that day. And you see on the right side there that funny looking character. And you see right above it the gerrymander, first time in the English language that it ever appeared in print. So what is a gerrymander? The short story of this is that the Federalist Party had control of New England almost entirely since the beginning of the country. There was the 1810 census, as Hannah pointed out, and the Jeffersonian Party actually took charge of the state of Massachusetts just after the 1810 census. And it was up to the Jeffersonian Party for the first time ever in history to redistrict the state, both congressional. And this cartoon you see on the left is appeared with the word for the first time. And as the old saying goes, this monster, as they say in the editorial, the monster looked like a salamander. And then someone said, let's say it's really a gerrymander, after Governor Elbridge Gerry, who was the first Jeffersonian governor of the state of Massachusetts, who signed the law that made this funny little district. It was happened to be a state senatorial district. So that's where the word comes from. It actually comes from a real individual, the governor of Massachusetts. Now, there's all kinds of gerrymanderings. There can be racial gerrymanderings, political gerrymanderings, and I use this example of a racial gerrymandering from the 60s in the South. There was very little gerrymandering in the South prior to the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s, because African Americans basically could not vote or voted a very small amount. And this is an example of Hinds County, city of Jackson there. And they had 5 county commissioners to be elected in the county. And here is the city of Jackson. And within the city of Jackson, we had the African-American community, very segregated. And so how are we going to draw these lines to make sure that African-Americans do not elect an African-American commissioner, even though they may be 20, 30, 40% of the population? Gerrymandering. So here you can see the lines that go through, cutting in 5 nice slices the African-American community in the city, and then extending them into the rural area. So this is called a racial gerrymandering. By the way, the Supreme Court has only ruled twice on redistricting, and we're going to see the most current law that did not rule, but they have ruled that racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional, although there's plenty of litigation going on even in this last decade. And they have ruled that the other thing about redistricting, that districts must be somewhat equal in population. So those are pretty hard and fast rules that the Supreme Court has ruled on. So let's get to West Virginia. I'm going to talk about an extremely interesting thing that happened in our state. Someday I'm going to write an article about it. West Virginia congressional redistricting, and I'm going to give a background to the current 2nd congressional district. In 1990, census reduced the U.S. House delegation from West Virginia to 4 to 3. The governor, the state senate, House of Delegates, and 4 members of the House were all Democrats. So we had 4 incumbent Democrats, and we're going to have 3 districts. Something has to give. Very similar to what I'm going to talk about at the end here of what's facing this state today. So this is a map of what the congressional districts were in the 80s, and the last election of this map was in 1990. And some of the older people in the audience may remember Hardy Staggers Jr., his father, a long-term West Virginia congressman. Representing down here in the southern West Virginia, Nick Joe Rahal in the 4th district. Bob Wise was a member of Congress in 1990. He is from Kanawha County. Alan Mollahan from my neighboring county of Marion County here. And here's Harley Stagger's home in Mineral County. So what happened is that the power structure in the Democratic Party got together and said, there has to be one odd man out, and we know who it is. It's going to be Harley Staggers. And so the new lines are going to be drawn. And this is what's very rare to talk about this in political geography. Intra-party gerrymander, when one party controls the entire redistricting process and purposely redraws a legislative district to eliminate one of their own party members from likely election. And one of the great examples in American history was Harley Staggers in 1992. And there's a very strong evidence that Republican Allen West in Florida was redistricted out by his own party back in 2012. So here we have the map. Here we have the 4 House residents of the 4 members of Congress at the time. And here we have the new districts. Now I'm going to be using this map that is from the actually first decade. And it's, I know that the districts were slightly different in 92, 2002, and 2012, believe me. The few counties changed to keep the population But I use this map because it's very visual. And so this is my visualization that I'm going to be using of the 2nd district, mostly here. And so here we have the new 1st district, where Ellen Mollahan is in the same district with Holly Staggers. And if you remember the old map, this is mostly Mollahan's old district. So what happened to Holly Staggers' district? Well, it's a little bit here, a little bit here, and a little bit there. So his district was basically eliminated and divided by 3. And he was put together with Ellen Mollahan, an extremely powerful member of the House of Representatives on the Finance Committee. And Mollahan easily won the primary, and then he went to the general election. So this is the transition from the 4 to the 3 that we have now. And talking about the 2nd district, which covers the Eastern Panhandle, this is why it looks so funny. And it was done purposely in the 1992 redistricting process. And that's what we have basically today. So it stretches from Maryland and Virginia across the state of West Virginia to the Ohio River to Ohio. It borders 3 different states that are non-contiguous states. So what does the West Virginia Constitution say about this? Quote, representatives of Congress for the election of representative Congress shall be divided into districts corresponding to the number of representatives which may be entitled, which district shall be formed in contiguous counties and be compact, my emphasis, and each district shall be equal population. So take a look at the district. Is the 2nd district compact? That is a real interesting question in geography and geometry. So in 2012, 20 years after the district was formed, Jefferson County Commission brought suit against Natalie Tennant, who was Secretary of State in charge of elections at the time, saying 3 things: that the population of the 3 districts was not equal under court precedent, was not compact under the state constitution, and the population was not equal under state constitution. So it went to court. I was asked to be an expert witness by the 3-judge panel, and my particular expertise was number 2 there. Was the district compact in the rules of geography and the rules of geometry? And if you, at the end, you want me to talk about what compactness is and throw out all kinds of terms, I will. But I did appear in court down in Charleston, and I did testify about that, the 2nd district. So on January 4th, 2012, the 3-judge panel voted that they didn't rule on the 2nd and 3rd suits, but they did rule that there was some equal population problem and ordered the state of West Virginia to redistrict. This case then, this is on January 4th, this case then goes to the Supreme Court. And about 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court stayed the lower court's ruling requiring the redrawing of congressional districts. And although they left something open, they said the state could move forward on these new district lines for 2012, of which we have today. So that's kind of where our funny 2nd district comes from, and we can talk about that later. But during the decade, the last decade from last census, gerrymandering has really taken off. This is part for many different reasons. Computer-generated gerrymandering is awesome. The control of states more and more by one particular party. So let's look at just 2012, just of those districts that were done right after the last census. National-wise, the congressional candidates for the Republican Party got about 58 million. The Democrats got a little over 59.5 million. And so nationally, there were more votes for the Democrat congressional candidates. And a lot of this, we have a term called, is it geography or gerrymandering? I mean, there's the geography of voters is somewhat concentrated. You throw in gerrymandering, and it's a very complex situation. And at the 2012 election, about 54% of the House was Republican, about 46 Democrat. So let's look at a couple examples of gerrymandering that exist today. This is the state of Ohio currently. It started the districts in 2012. And I'm going to concentrate on this area here, if you can see my pointer, this green area along the very top of the state of Ohio, the 9th Congressional District. I happen to be from Toledo, Ohio. And my long-term congresswoman is Marcy Copter. Her house is right here. And she's the longest serving woman representative in American history. She's still there today. So she was very popular. Over in Cleveland, 120 miles, was another popular person, Dennis Kucinich, and some of you remember his name. So he was very popular in his home district around Cleveland. Marcy was popular in Toledo. They were both very influential in Congress, influential Democrats. And so the Republican Party said, how do we get rid of them? Well, we'll just put them in the same district, even though they're 120 miles away. So the funny lines here, this is Marcy's house, and it's just like up the block there from Marcy's house, along the state shoreline here, over to Dennis Kucinich's house. This is called the Snake on the Lake. It's one way of getting rid of opponents if you have two good ones. This cartoon I love. This is a cartoon from the recent Pennsylvania State Court ruling. Goofy kicking Donald Duck. I can see Goofy there, actually. Laughing girl kicking the Energizer Bunny. I see the Energizer Bunny because I see him on TV. Korea and Japan. I do see Japan over here, and maybe this is South Korea. Or is this the 7th Congressional District of the state of Pennsylvania? So here's a graphic that shows the morphing of what could probably be called in 1953, a congressional district that covered 1 or 2 counties, had a community of interest, looked somewhat compact based on the county boundary lines, and marching through time, 53, 63, 73, looking a little funny, back here in 90th Congress, 93, 2003, and this was the law passed by the Pennsylvania legislature for the 2012 election. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a gerrymander. That is packing a particular party in one particular space and allowing a particular party who has minor votes to elect people in the neighboring districts. So some of the statistics here, we'll just use Ohio. I could call this screen up again if you guys want to do this later. But state of Ohio here, about 48% of the vote in the state of Ohio congressional districts goes to the Democratic Party, 52 Republican. Of the 16 seats, the Democrats got 4 of 16, even though they get about half of the vote. It's similar in Michigan, North Carolina, Wisconsin. These are all incredibly gerrymandered states, and these are Republican gerrymanders. And the Democrats do the same thing. The Democrats gerrymander, the Republicans gerrymander, both parties do it. Both parties are wrong. Citizens of goodwill should say, we don't want you to do this anymore. It's undemocratic. State of Illinois is a great example. Here we had about 55% of the electorate vote Democrat. They get 12 of the 18 seats. And Maryland is the classic example. We're going to get to Governor Hogan in just a second. Maryland's a classic example. About half the Maryland vote is Democrat, and they get 7 of the 8 seats. That's a really good gerrymander. That is really taking away votes from other people. So here's a great quote. Partisan gerrymandering has become a tool of powerful interests to distort the democratic process. Sounds very progressive statement. So who made this statement? It was in a legal brief to the Supreme Court by a group of Republicans, and I'll just give you a few of the people who signed this. Senator John McCain, Governor Kasich of Ohio, Bob Dole, John Danforth, Richard Lugar, well-known Republican senators. Senator Simpson of Wyoming was thought to be one of the most conservative senators in the 20th century, yet he knew right from wrong, and he signed this brief along with Arthur Schwarzenegger and other prominent Republicans. Democrats on their side also had a brief, and they also have a thing called the National Democratic Redistricting Commission, which former Attorney General Holder is the chairman. Gerrymandering has broken our democracy. It's time to fix it now, is one of his statements. So what happened? It did go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled on June 27th, 2019, that gerrymandering was, and redistricting was a political process. And that I'm going to read you the exact Supreme Court ruling. This is one of the darker days of my career. The voters and other plaintiffs in North Carolina and Maryland filed suits challenging their state's congressional redistricting maps as unconstitutional partisan gerrymanders. The North Carolina plaintiffs claimed the state's redistricting plan discriminated against Democrats, while the Maryland's plaintiffs claimed their state's plan discriminated against Republicans. The plaintiffs alleged violations of the First Amendment Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment Election Clause. District courts in both cases ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, and the defendants appealed directly to the Supreme Court. One sentence they held: partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts. So where are we now? We are with the state courts, the state legislature, and citizens. So what's happened in the last 10 years, and actually if you go back a little bit longer, perhaps the last 20 years, and I keep this in red, the redrawing of United States congressional districts and state legislative district boundaries should be done by a nonpartisan, independent citizens commission. Now, is the drawing of legislative districts by the legislatures themselves a conflict of interest? So right now we have about 20 different states that have some form of redistricting commission. There's a few very powerful ones. They're called primary commissions, which actually, some of them actually, the commission itself draws the district lines. The legislature and governor have nothing to do about it. That's the law, because that's the law that was passed. Other primary commissions submit their maps to the legislature and the governor, and 99% of the time, such as in the state of Iowa, they are accepted. There are backup commissions in case there's states that are split between Republican governor and a Democratic legislature. There are advisory commissions that can advise the legislature and the governor on a way to draw states. So this is a relatively new thing in the last 10, 20 years. And what are these commissions? They're independent, bipartisan, nonpartisan. They practice transparency and openness. They actually have meetings. Some states say you must go to these 5 cities in the states, show them the maps and saying, what do you think of your particular area? They encourage public participation. And I call this the rules of geography, that the district should be compact, contiguous, combine communities of interest and not split communities of interest, respect political boundaries, and of course, what the Supreme Court says, they have to be equal in population and prohibit minority gerrymandering, whether that's Hispanic, American Indians, or African American. So the movement in 2018 midterm elections got a tremendous boost, where for the largest time or the most time in American history, ballot reform and redistricting and commissions went before 4 states: Utah and Missouri, somewhat conservative states; Colorado and Michigan, somewhat liberal states. And on the ballot was, shall we have a commission or shall we have a different way of redistricting? It passed every state. Let's look at Colorado. 71% of the people say this is the way we should redistrict for the future of American democracy. I point out that the Democratic governor at that very same election got 51% of the vote. The commission got 71% of the vote. That is, many Democrats, many Republicans, many independents says this is the right thing to do. And it was that case in most states. Utah was a little different because Mitt Romney was running. Last November, Virginia had the same on its ballot. Biden won the state by 54%. At 65%, well over 65%. voted to have a commission. So now we have a commission formed in Virginia, and they'll be doing the state and the congressional redistricts. So again, every time it's gone before the citizens to have a commission, the citizens in their wisdom say, yeah. The commissions are, again, there's 20 different ones. I've read most of the laws. There are different fine nuances of them. They can have the legislative staff and legislative services of their legislature service them. If they have a budget, they can have their own staff. Many state GIS technical centers look at geography expertise and some of the programs that we have for redistricting. HR1, which we'll talk about in a second, talks about consulting firms and having funds for consulting firms. The participation of reform organizations and participations of citizens of all types, many of those who are listening to me today. In the West Virginia legislature, we have bills introduced now to form a commission. So that is been introduced. It is there. The latest thing that's happened, extremely interesting, that Republican Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, for I think the first time in American history, has created a commission by executive order. In other words, Governor Justice, it looks like, by legal precedent, could, by executive order, make a commission for the state of West Virginia. We have time. So anyway, Governor Hogan established a commission, very bipartisan, and that's how Maryland's going to do it, apparently. Very, very new and very different thing on the scene, literally only a few weeks ago. There is HR1, which we now know in the last week or so probably is not going to pass the Senate. It passed the House. It is an omnibus bill that has a huge amount of things in it. And what I'd like to propose now that HR1, I've given this talk several times, and now I know HR1's not going to make it. I propose this to the members of Congress. In HR1, there's section 2401, which says there should be required congressional districting to be conducted through a plan of independent state commission. In other words, this bill doesn't say state legislature has to have a commission. It doesn't say that cities have to have ward commissions throughout the boundary. It just says that Congress has a right to control elections. In other words, elections are going to be in November. They're going to be on a Tuesday. They're going to have single districts. With respect to, I think it would be tremendous overreach to say that the state has to be fair, but what they're saying in HR1 in this particular section is that let's have congressional districts done by a bipartisan commission. And it is, and the selection of the commission members seems to be very bipartisan. So what I propose is that you take section 2401 out of HR1, you pass it in the House of Representatives, you put before the Senate, and you say, okay, this gigantic, and it's 886 pages, by the way, this gigantic bill, how about this section of the bill? How about doing it the right way, at least for congressional districts, in my opinion? So where we are today is that we have 3 incumbent Republican members of the House. We have my congressman up here, David McKinley. We have your in the Panhandle there, Alex Murphy, and Carol Miller down here in Campbell and Huntington. And we're going to have 2 districts. And the state of West Virginia is going to pit 2 incumbent Republicans against each other. And the 1992 story is going to reappear. So I can't wait to the joint committee, which they call it now in their press release, to draw that congressional district lines. You know, our state is going to 100 single member districts in the House of Delegates. That did not occur before. There were multi-member districts. Redistricting this time is very important. As David said in the beginning, this is a 10-year item. It's what we do now is going to be 10 years of American democracy. Let's get it right. Thank you.